Probably wished a lot of people Merry Christmas over the weekend, but now some professors are connecting seasonal cheer to white nationalism. We'll discuss those claims next. Newsweek magazine is delivering an important warning this Christmas season. On Sunday, Newsweek published an article saying that the Nazis and Donald Trump, quote, stole Christmas to promote white nationalism. In the piece, several writers and academics warned that phrases like Merry Christmas have become a dog whistle, showing support for whites and veiled hatred of Muslims, Jews, atheists, immigrants. Doubtless, painting Easter eggs will soon be a hateful assault on vegans everywhere. Nell Daly is a psychotherapist, and she joins us. Nell, do you buy into this idea that Merry Christmas is a racist dog whistle?
Well, I want to just talk about the article from Newsweek, not necessarily what I believe. As a journalist, I did some research into this, and I read the article, and then I thought to myself, is there actually a war on Christmas happening? So 9 out of every 10 Americans in the United States celebrate Christmas. So I thought, okay, well, maybe there isn't a war happening. But what is happening in the Pew Center, which is a bipartisan research organization, came out with a study yesterday saying that only 46% of the people who actually celebrate Christmas view it as a religious holiday, which is down from 51% in 2013. So in a sense, there is a changing of the tides. I don't want to say a war on Christmas, but a changing of the tides that people in American society are becoming less religious.
But none of that surely justifies this comparison of Trump and the Nazis. I mean, for a start, the Nazis basically secularized Christmas. They turned it into a kind of pagan nature worship. So if anyone's comparable to the Nazis, it's the old hippy-dippy winter solstice worshippers all dancing around worshipping Mother Earth on December 21st or whatever it is. I mean, isn't that ridiculous, just to compare the Nazis and Trump for their attitude to Christmas?
I think what the article was suggesting, and not myself, I think what the article was suggesting was that Trump is using this language to embolden...
Well, wait a minute, language like Merry Christmas.
Well, it's not just saying Merry Christmas, he's saying now the war on Christmas has ended. So the question is, was there ever a war on Christmas? And when you suggest that there was a war on Christmas, you make people feel defensive. Well, what people feel defensive when we say that there actually was a war on Christmas?
No, wasn't it that people were being made to be made defensive because they go to the shopping mall and the clerk says Happy Holidays, as if there's something kind of dirty and not quite respectable about saying Merry Christmas? It's
interesting you bring that up, because in the Pew Center research, about half of the people polled don't really care how they're addressed in stores during the holidays. They don't feel one way or the other, whether people say Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays. So I think, again, that the culture is changing and people are becoming much more okay with how everyone wants to express themselves in terms of the holidays.
Well, except on one side, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is this shakedown racket, essentially. They've all got very rich on it, salting their money away in British colonial tax havens. The SPLC Hate Tracker tracks as hate phrases hashtag Christmas and hashtag Jesus is the reason for the season. How come the hate group tracker that's quoted by all the mainstream media thinks hashtag Jesus is the reason for the season is a hate phrase?
That's really interesting. I can't answer that question. I don't know why. I really don't. I mean, I think, again, that the tides are changing. And, you know, the whole idea of saying that there was a war on Christmas is a backlash against a political correctness movement that started coming out during the 1990s. The premise of the political correctness movement, as far as I understand it, both from a psychotherapist point of view and from a journalist point of view, is about being inclusivity. So we want to have more room at the table for people to express themselves.
No.
It doesn't necessarily mean you take a seat away.
No, but doesn't it come because like Bush has his happy Ramadan and all the rest of it, and suddenly it's Christmas, the big mainstream thing that has to be happy holidays, but Ramadan, happy Hanukkah and all the rest of it, happy Eid and all the rest of it. Thank you, Dale. We have to run. Speaking of Christmas, after
Eric Dyson has a solution to white privilege. He says white Americans ought to create individual reparations accounts to compensate black Americans for centuries of oppression. Professor Dyson joins us now to explain how that would work and why. Professor, great to see you.
Good to see you, my friend.
So how would this work and why?
Well, yeah. Well, it's in the context, let me just briefly say, it's in the context of a much broader discussion about white privilege, white innocence, white American identity, and it's much more complicated than that, and I go at African-American culture's contradictions as well. And then in the end, when I'm making suggestions about what can be done, many white people approach me and ask me, what can I do? Not in terms of the broad social transformation out there in the world. We all believe in that or argue about it, redistribution of resources or not. But when people ask me, what can I as an individual do, one of the things I suggested, besides being educated, besides participating with other African-American and Latino and other brothers and sisters in social movement, is to do something called an individual repair of inequality. And if they feel inclined to do so, this is for people who are so inclined to seek out a way to compensate individually for what they think is a systemic injustice. So I talked about buying kids computers, being able to take kids to school, to tutor them, to be able to do individual things that are tailored to their desires and aspirations, such as becoming professionals, exposing them to things they wouldn't ordinarily see. So in other words, it's a kind of ethic of compassion joined to a sense of conscience that motivates them to do what they're motivated to do.
Well, so I support a lot of that. I mean, I believe in charity. What I don't believe in is collective guilt. And that's why I'm confused by the phrase white privilege.
Well, white privilege doesn't suggest guilt. It suggests responsibility and accountability. The same accountability that America talks to about people pulling up themselves by their bootstraps and addressing their situations, their communities, as being responsible for doing what they're doing. I don't believe in collective guilt, but I do believe in collective responsibility.
Responsibility and guilt are synonyms in this case. And let me just ask, let's be specific. So, privilege. I'm privileged, and I wouldn't deny that, not because I'm white, because I have a good-paying job. But you're privileged, too.
Of course I am.
So we live near each other in a nice neighborhood. You're rich. You went to an Ivy League school, unlike me. And so you're way more privileged than most white Americans. Well, so why would they owe you something?
Well, first of all, privilege is contingent upon the context in which it's defined. So individual cases could have an imbalance, that people of color could be way more privileged, as you talked about, than the average, say, white person. But remember, during Jim Crow, Jackie Robinson was more privileged than most white people in terms of having the ability to make a good living on a job, but he was still denied access to a water fountain. His kids still couldn't go to the same school. So I'm saying to you that your argument then seems to be rather vulnerable to rebuff, because it doesn't mean economic accumulation can prevent you from experiencing what are essentially racial inequalities. So the amount of money you have doesn't do that.
Yeah, and in 1955, I think that was much truer than it is now.
Well, even now, when we talk about the disparities in terms of people's achievement, a study was done by Diva Pager at Princeton University that said a black person with a college education had less of a chance to get a job than a white person who had gone to prison. So even now, I'm not talking about 50 years ago, I'm talking about this is going on right now. The disparities are very real.
Right. So if I live in eastern Kentucky and I am unemployed, why am I more privileged than you? And why am I in any way, as you put it, responsible for problems of people I've never met on the other side of the country?
Look, I mean, we know that larger forces provide people opportunities or disadvantages. When you come, many people say, let me even stretch it even further. Some people say, look, I came to this country 20 years ago. I came to this country 30 years ago. I wasn't advantaged directly by the system of enslavement that prevailed in America. But if you come to this country as an immigrant and you're a white immigrant and you inherit certain privileges associated with people who are already here, that means that that privilege extends to you regardless of the fact that you indirectly benefited from it and you did not directly contribute to inequality. The Constitution was written a long time ago, so was the Declaration of Independence. But those ancient documents continue to inform people's lives and shape their aspirations.
So let me flip it around. And let me just also note there's a lot of hostility in what you're saying. And I'm sure you'll say there isn't, but obviously there is.
Not at all.
I think it's pretty clear.
It's just it's recognition of the situation. It's pushback on whiteness that is usually not called out.
Clearly hostile. But leaving that aside, let me flip around for a second. If I'm an African immigrant who comes here, I'm resettled from Somalia at public expense, high public expense, am I due these reparations too?
I think that the people who have benefited from systemic inequity in this country have been overwhelmingly white brothers and sisters. And what I'm talking about is a direct relationship to a notable and a documentable and an empirically verifiable system of inequality. There's nothing that's very obscure about that. And I'm saying to you that people of color who are here now, who have inherited that legacy as a result of their black skin and their relationship to black culture, have to be acknowledged.
Well, wait,
but my book is not simply about reparations. You're reducing
I know that it's not, but
so much larger.
It's heavily about privilege. But let me just really we're almost out of time.
It's about white refusal to acknowledge responsibility.
If a majority white country brings in a black African at its own expense, they still owe him reparations for slavery?
No, I'm talking about the people who are here. That's an isolated event. I'm talking about the majority of African American people who are here, who are part and parcel of what this country has been, and who have built it in its institutions to become what it is now.
If you want to know more about this argument, you can read this book, Tears We Cannot Stop. Michael Eric Dyson. Thanks a lot, Professor. Good to see you.
Always good to see you, my brother.
We'll be right back.
Christmas, everybody. Happy holidays.
Okay, so Margaret, I mean, this is a line that we have heard from Donald Trump many. Why does he continue? This is a dog whistle to the base because no one has ever stopped saying Merry Christmas.
Yeah, except for that if you turn on some of our competitive cable networks, they have entire hours and programming about the war on Christmas. And it is intended directly to go towards that cultural base that feels that other people are taking their America away from them. That was the dog whistle, Make America Great Again. Great from what, right? The people who are taking Christmas away from you, the people who are taking your politics away from you, the people who are taking, all of your teddy bears away from you, whatever it is, right? We're going to make it great. We're going to bring Christmas back. And that's, it's disingenuous. It's not true. But there is a kernel of truth. But you have to understand, there is a
not much
kernel
of fact-based on the
cultural, to the
lately,
cultural
these days
resentment.
it used to be.
No, but the politics of cultural resentment is all about narrative, right? And when confronted with facts, it falls apart, but it's because things feel emotionally true, where they're literally true. The problem is that's a bad basis for policy, and it's a lousy basis for trying to unite the nation.
Yeah. And you two looking like I said, all lit.
We're just trying to unite the nation here. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
And happy holidays, too.
President Trump was so merry that when he thanked Congressman Steve Scalise, he made light of the fact that Scalise was